Hey, my name is Mike. Welcome to Outdoorsey Thursday. Today we're going to talk about car basics, and I mean super, super basic. Like, you teach to a 5-year-old. So send this video to your friend, your girlfriend, your boyfriend that has no knowledge of anything about cars at all. This is the video for them. So this is a seat, obviously, and you're going to sit here and look out of the windshield. Now, cars back in the day didn't have windshields. I'll put up a picture. And so this is the windshield, and these are the windshield wipers or windshield wiper blades. These usually last about 6 to 12 months, sometimes a little longer, but yeah, you're looking about replacing these about once a year. And what they do are go ahead and wipe off the water so you can still see out of it while driving. So obviously this is a key, and you need a key to go ahead and plug into your ignition. And when you turn it, you'll turn it all the way over, and you'll hear a da-da-da-da-da, and then you kind of release, and the car will start up. But what does that actually do? So if you come down here, you can pull in the hood latch release. Now you also have a secondary safety hood latch release, which is usually in the center of the hood. So mine is this little tiny flip up thing that you just kind of flip it up and pull it up. My hood goes ahead and has these stabilizing bars, but some you'll have to put a stick or a rod to go ahead and hold the hood up. Now this is the engine bay. It has the engine and has other components, but the one we're talking about that's most important is the battery. This car, however, has it in the trunk, but we'll just go over to the truck real quick. This is the battery. It's one of the most important pieces of your car. Your car will not start with a dead battery, and batteries usually last about 5 to 10 years, but in hotter climates like here in the desert, they usually fail every 2 years. So just keep that in mind. If your car is not starting, this is one of the first places to look. But this powers your car, and more importantly, in the very beginning, when you turn that key, it powers the starter or the starter motor. So when you turn the key, it uses the battery power to power the electric starter, and that electric starter turns the engine to start up the engine. If you go and look at like maybe Mary Poppins, we'll go ahead and show a clip of him turning the starter. That was a manual starter back in the day, not an electric starter with a battery. Okay, so the engine on most normal cars, the combustion cars, run off of combustion or baby explosions inside of the engine, right? And those explosions, just like every fire, needs oxygen, needs a fuel source, and it needs an ignition or some sort of spark. So for air, every car is going to have an air filter, and that air filter filters the air to the engine. So that's how it gets the oxygen while it's going. It sucks it out of this box through the filter into the engine. Now on gas-powered combustion engines, it needs a spark plug. I'm sure you've heard of that term, a spark plug. It's just a little plug that goes into each piston. Now the spark plugs usually last about 100,000 miles, but there's one per piston, and so if you have a V8 like this truck is, then you have 8 pistons, which means you have 8 spark plugs that are needed to go ahead and start that fire. Start that explosion. It's going to be a little spark from that spark plug that starts the fire. But you also need fuel. So this is the fuel door because it's the door for the fuel can. And most times they'll go ahead and put right in here which type of fuel. This needs 91 premium. And so if you go to a gas station, this is how you tell what type of gas you need, because most gas stations have a few options, 3, 4, 5 options. And so your car is going to tell you what one to use. It doesn't matter if you don't know the differences between it. Just use the right one for the car. So now you have fuel coming in, and now you have air coming in, and now you have spark coming in from the battery, and they cause little explosions that push down the piston, which pushes the power rod. I'm not going to go into it too much, but it pushes and creates power. And when you have, again, a V8, you have 8 different pistons pushing. So V8s have more power most of the time, generally speaking, than a V6 that only has 6 pistons, or a inline 4 that only has 4 pistons. And there's a lot of engines, but we're not going to go into them. But it's just the different types of shapes of where the pistons are orientated and how many pistons there are. So the engine, with all of its exploding pistons, right, it turns that power and pushes that power into the transmission. Now the transmission transfers that power into different types of power depending on the gear. Now all that means is it spins the transmission gears, which then spins this big fat rod that transfers all the way to the back differential plate, which is just a big ball that basically turns this type of power into this type of power. and it will go ahead and turn the axle, which is the part that the wheels go onto. It's going to turn this way, and it's going to turn it this way. So now it's powering the wheels, and the wheels make contact to the ground, and the ground contact moves the car. So here we have a wheel and tire. The tire is the black part, the rubbery part. The rim is this metal part. And then you have these lug nuts, usually 6 or 5. It can go up or down, but normally 6 or 5 lug nuts that attach the wheel to the actual car, to the actual axle. And again, this makes contact to the ground, this makes contact to the car, and they're paired together, and you need some air in there to make sure that if you hit a bump, it can go ahead and keep on moving down the road. Now tires, they get replaced depending on the tire between 25 to 60,000 miles, and the wheels, they usually stay for the lifetime of the car unless you want to have a different look on your car. Now the brakes of a car are inside the wheels, and it's not too easy to show on here, but that's the silver part is the brake rotor, which turns with the wheel. And then the brakes, when you apply the brakes, push these 2 brake pads, which need to be changed roughly every 40,000 miles, and they go ahead and pinch. And they pinch that rotor, so while that's turning, it pinches it and slows the car down until it completely stops. Now this is an emergency brake, so you can pull it during emergencies or when you're parked. That's why sometimes it's called a parking brake. Now if you press the brake pedal, it applies the brake pressure on the front wheels and the back wheels. But this goes ahead and has an actual mechanical wire to the back wheels to stop the back brakes in case of an emergency. If the fluid has a leak on the front, you can still stop the vehicle mechanically. Manual car, manual versus automatic, means when it's a manual, you're actually manually selecting which gear it'll be in, and an automatic does it automatically. Whenever you start the car, you need to make sure it's in neutral, because you don't want the car to go ahead and start the engine up and then it just starts moving right away, right? So you gotta make sure it's in neutral, or if you're in an automatic, it's in park. Now in most cars, you will only find that right pedal, which is the gas pedal, and then the middle pedal, which is the brake pedal. On a manual, you'll have a clutch pedal, but we're not going to get into that today. But when you press on the gas pedal, it opens up in the engine an air flap to allow more air in, to allow more power. And that's why you go faster the more that gas pedal is down, because it's opening and allowing more power. Again, that's the brake pedal, and that's the clutch pedal. So this is the back of the car, and these are called the taillights because they're on the back of the tail of the car. And so when you apply the brake, these light up, and these light up, and this middle one lights up, and you need 3 lights in America to be safe. And then these white lights right there and right here light up when the car is in reverse, indicating that you're going backwards. But these are the tail lights, and on the front they're called the headlights because that's the head of the car. So here's the headlights on the truck, and so the light comes out and produces light for night. Make sure you're using those at night. Now this is the grill of the car, which allows 2 things. One, air to come in, so you can use air to go into the engine, but the engine gets hot while it's running, right? It's a little baby explosion, so we need to cool that down somehow. And while the air is coming through, it goes through the radiator, which then cools down the coolant. So as the air is coming through, it's hitting this radiator, which is right here, and it's cooling the water or the coolant that is going through it. So it's cooling the coolant, which the coolant runs around and goes through a bunch of little holes in the engine, getting the heat from the engine and then coming back through the radiator to be cooled down. So you got to make sure your engine has enough coolant inside of it to make sure it stays cool, or else it's going to overheat. So coolant is the second most important fluid inside of the car. The first is not the gas, it's the oil. So inside your engine, a lot of metal parts, and they're moving quick, and it's hot, and it's a terrible environment. You would never want to live in there. But the oil lubricates all these metal parts to make sure that they're moving safely and smoothly and not causing destruction inside of there. Again, a lot of explosions. So you have to make sure that you change your oil every 5,000 miles on the normal. Some go for a little bit more, some go for a little bit less, but 5,000 is usually what we say to get your oil changed. So you take out all the old oil, you put new oil in so you can keep the engine running. And that is the most important thing, the most important maintenance job you can do on a car is an oil change. So make sure you do that. Couple important things inside the engine bay is this is the brake fluid. You got to make sure that is up and not down, because if you don't have enough brake fluid, then you can't stop the car. Here is the windshield wiper fluid, which again, the windshield wiper gets a little dirty, and sometimes you need a little bit of liquid to make sure that you can clean it off with those wipers. This is the coolant reservoir, so you gotta make sure that that is filled to make sure that you have enough coolant in the engine. There's a couple other parts, but we don't really need to get into them right now. Alright, that is that for today's video of the basics. We might get into another basics video that goes a little bit into more depth on things, but I think this gives you a general idea of how a car operates and what you need to do and what you need to replace at certain areas.